Thank you. Before I take the audience questions, I just want to shift the discussion a little bit. One area in which we see lots of differing opinions, whether it's Sephardic, Ashkenaz, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, is regarding the role of women in Judaism. So here in our community, many of our grandmothers and great-grandmothers, who, while they are the matriarchs of our family, were never educated in the religious sphere. Today, we see a huge change happening as the women are educated alongside the men. The women are teachers, leaders, and integral to passing on our heritage. I wanted to ask you, what is the ideal role of women in Judaism? And is there a different role between men and women? Do we still have more to change in this area? And if so, what? Maybe we'll start with you, Rabbi Dweck. I know that you spoke about some changes that your own synagogue was facing regarding this issue.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, our grandmothers and great-grandmothers may not have been educated in the traditional sense, but they were pretty educated as far as our traditions were concerned. My grandmother, may she rest in peace, she knew Birkat HaMazon by heart. She prayed full tefillah every day. She knew these things almost by osmosis, by hearing it from her parents, her mother, her father, and theirs before them. But you're right. There wasn't formal education. And that has to move with the times. It really does, because the way that we live in the world today is that there is no differentiation in terms of how it is that we're educated. Our community, the Syrian community, is coming up on this. It wasn't tradition. I think it's important for us to recognize and say it wasn't tradition even for many of the girls to go to university. We're coming into that the girls are going to university. The boys are developing forward that way. And when you have a world where every bit of information is accessible, literally at a touch, we cannot expect that information is just simply going to come in out of the air. And our sons and our daughters, it is our responsibility to make sure that they are educated and that they feel empowered. And that actually is a requirement of the Torah, that a parent must be sure that both their boys and their girls, their sons and their daughters, are empowered and provided with all that they need to be full-fledged members of society. And education is no different. And so from that perspective, absolutely it has to happen. What happened, you're referring to what happened in my community in England. It's a very patriarchal society. And especially, that's one thing that Sfaradim we keep towing that along. And, that's one thing that I'd like to turn to the Ashkenazim and say, maybe we could learn a thing or two. It's a patriarchal system, even in the Western, Sephardi world. And women were not allowed to sit on the board for 350 years. And when I came in, one woman was allowed to be on the board. And we changed that. And so now it is equal, that women and men can sit on the board, and I insisted on it. As a matter of fact, even when I was here, head of school at Barkai Yeshiva, I insisted that there were women on the board. It's essential to our leadership, it's essential to our sons and our daughters to be able to see that they should be able to be completely involved in how it is that we run in our communities and our societies. So I'm grateful that I was able to do that in England. I'm grateful that that happened here when I was here, but it's only the tip of the iceberg. Really, we have a great deal to move in terms of that direction.
Thank you. Rabbi Sachs, what have you seen in your synagogue in your time regarding this matter?
What struck me here in terms of the Ashkenazi world is when the whole issue arose, and it arose really in Eastern Europe in the 1920s with Sarah Shanira and the Beit Yaakov school movement. The people who really gave her the bracha to do what hadn't been done before, to give girls the same kind of formal education as boys had. Don't forget, the Rambam himself rules like Rabbi Eliezer in the Talmud Yerushalmi, and he takes a negative approach to this. And believe me, even though Rambam was Sephardi, we've made him an honorary Ashkenazi as well.
Good move.
So what is striking is that the people who gave their bracha to Sarah Shanira were not people in the modern Orthodox world. They were the Chofetz Chaim and the Gerer Rebbe. Here in America, the people who really fought for women's education were the late Rav Yosef Soloveitchik and the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Both of them really fought for that, and they were both very courageous. So, these were the Gedolim Sheba Gedolim. These were the absolute giants. And they said it has to happen because the previous situation, which had endured for centuries and thousands of years, was that women really didn't go out into the world, and therefore they learnt by seeing, not by formal instruction. But as soon as women started going out into the world, going to university, having careers, all of the Gedolim understood that they have to receive an education. Now the question is there a difference between what women bring to Torah and what men bring to Torah? And I say that if you look through Tanakh, you will see two verses in particular that talk about the difference. Malachi talks about Ki siftei Kohen yishmeru dat, and Kohanim were men, they weren't women. So he's talking about men's Torah, and he says, Torat emet al pihu, the law of truth was on his lips. The last chapter of Sefer Mishlei, which we say every Friday evening, which talks about Eshet Chayil, says Torat Chesed al Lashonah. There's a difference between the Torah of truth, which can sometimes be quite harsh, and the Torah of Chesed, which is never harsh, which is always human, sensitive, emotionally subtle and literate. And that is what women teaching Torah will bring. They will bring the Chesed back into Torah. Now, Elaine and I had the great privilege of knowing when we were at university a woman who's become one of the great Torah teachers of our generation. She was writing a doctorate on English literature at the time, but you all know her by the name of Aviva Zornberg. And you read Aviva Zornberg and you are reading Torat Chesed. So therefore I think that there has been a woman's voice that has been missing from the conversation of Torah for many centuries, and it's coming back in our time. Now what gives us the right to do this? And the answer is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I hate to break this to you, that not only was HaKadosh Baruch Hu not Ashkenazi, he wasn't Sephardi either.
Stop it.
Moshe Rabbeinu was obviously Sephardi, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu was above these things. When it came to giving the Torah to Israel, said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Kol Toma Levet Yaakov v'taged livnei Yisrael. And Chazal say, and Rashi brings it in his commentary, Kotom alavet Yaakov ele hanashim. God gave the Torah to women before he gave it to men. So what we're seeing with this return of formal education for women is the situation that Hashem created on Sinai, and we're seeing this wonderful renewal through the women of Torah of our time.